Bitcoin is still under some pressure following the rejection at 94,000, despite the worst case scenario and the MicroStrategy delisting on the MSCI indexes being avoided. I'm going to break down my thoughts on the price action over the coming days and weeks. Has Bitcoin bottomed out? Are we going higher? Are we going to move up towards 100,000? Or is this just the start of a further downside move? Stay tuned to get my full thoughts in this video. So Bitcoin then currently trading around 90,490, so 90,500. To be honest with you, this is looking fairly constructive here. I can make the case for this being a local low before another challenge of 94,000. If we just throw on our Fibonacci tool so we can actually go from the most recent swing low to most recent swing high, you can see we have actually tagged our 50% level there on that move. So this would meet the criteria, in my opinion, for a local bottom and then to see a challenge higher. And I'll just actually draw a path on here to show you what this might look like. We might sort of come up here, test this level once again, probably consolidate a bit. I think on the fourth test, we will get through the 94,000 level. And then I personally think we could go up as high as around about 103, 104,000, something like that. Obviously, if we were to do that, if we just extend this bear flag across, trying to capture some of the lows the best we can actually see at that point, you're probably going to have this moving average also coming into play around these levels. And if we actually draw our Fibonacci retracement tool on from this swing high down to the low, obviously the breakdown swing, you can see we have been hitting this 50% retracement mark. If we can break through that, I think we will get through the 618 fairly swiftly. Obviously, this will be the first point of resistance that we need to bear in mind. So it will be paying some attention again if we get through there, should I say, if we get through 94,000 at sort of the 97 to 98,000 level. And then if we get through that, then you're going to have this pretty major resistance area between 102,000 and 105,000. And I think that would be the area that would be a no-brain short area for me before potentially seeing some further downside. So how the longer-term path would play out would be something like this. And obviously, this would mean that the low is in and we're off to the races. What I think could also happen and is absolutely a possibility, this is probably more likely if the stock market pulls back a bit from here. I don't think the stock market will pull back. So this would be currently my base case would be for the market to rally higher back to the 100K level. I know I've kind of been going a bit back and forth on this, but I think for me, the MSCI news and not delisting MicroStrategy is quite pivotal and does mean that immediate sell pressure, the sell pressure that was going to be overwhelming the market in the middle of this month, will no longer be there. So I can see the ability and potential for Bitcoin to pump to 100,000 again at some point over this month. Obviously, the other scenario is we come down and we retest these lows. I think without the MSCI delisting of MicroStrategy, I don't see us coming lower down to the targets at around 70K. But of course, anything's possible. We're just going to have to see what price action does on the way down there. But currently, I'm thinking this is probably the more likely scenario. Would a flush of these lows and a move back down to 80K make sense? Absolutely, it would. That would be a dip that I'd be interested in buying heavily, obviously with a tight stop below these lows. If that was lost, then it would be longs from around the 70,000 level. So that's very much what I'm thinking in the short term on Bitcoin. I hope that obviously makes some sense. And like I say, the catalyst for this move coming up to 100K is obviously the fact that a lot of people would have got short or sold their crypto thinking they were front running this major black swan event, or well, I guess a black swan is something that is completely unknown, but knowing about this high probability event, which is now off the table, or at least is pushed back by a few months. I believe MSR will review their decisions, or this decision, every quarter. So potentially that's an overhang that's going to stay on the market for the rest of the year. But in the short term, there is the ability for Bitcoin certainly to pump up to 100,000 still. So I'm just going to be keeping an eye on prices today. Obviously, you want to see a green candle today, and for us to get back and challenging that 94K level, a break of 94K. And I think, it's going to be 98 and then 104 on the upside as targets. Obviously, this does not change what the longer term outlook is. If we look at the longer term outlook, we can see I'm still expecting after this high for us to come down at some point, probably in the first half of this year, and challenge that 70,000 level. Probably get a strong bounce from there, but I think ultimately that bounce will fail and will come down at least down to our 200 week moving average, which is currently approaching 60,000. But certainly, if that's lost and if that doesn't put up strong resistance or strong support, should we say, on the downside, then I do see us coming as low as between 30 and 40,000 for an eventual bear market bottom. So that's very much what I'm seeing on Bitcoin. Let's just flip back to the daily chart. I mean, yeah, really straightforward analysis there. If we go over to this chart, you can see we also have a long-term trend line coming in around the 100,000 level. So like I say, if this does happen a little bit later on, if we see a bit more choppiness and a bit more of a corrective move, then potentially we come up to 100,000 a little bit more into February. And look, I think if we're just looking at my forecast for the stock market, and obviously I did a video on my forecast for the stock market, and in particular the Nasdaq and the S&P. I did that yesterday. I'm thinking we probably see a fairly strong Q1 for stocks, and we could go into a likely market top around about March. Maybe it comes sooner. Maybe it happens in January, and this high in the stock market ends up being a lower high or an equal high, and then we correct from there. But I think the stock market will see upside, and like I say, I'm really leaning on the fact that I think inflation will come in a little bit lower than forecast, and we'll see the market starting to price in a bit more dovishness from the Fed over the first couple of months of 2026, which will lead into a short-term high, probably a short-term high in the stock market. And that could also lead into that lower high in Bitcoin. And obviously through the course of the year, I'll probably see a pullback at some point in Q1 or Q2, sort of late Q1, Q2. All-time highs being made before year end, and then some sort of larger drawdown and correction when the market is in a euphoric state due to the new Fed chair coming in and likely cutting rates a bit too aggressively. So that is the forecast. Obviously, all of this is subject to change. The S&P, I'm looking at a similar outlook. So yeah, very similar path to what I've shown on the Nasdaq. In terms of the dollar seems to be showing some strength. So obviously, we usually talk about a inverse correlation between the dollar and the stock market and risk assets in general. This has been a little bit muddied over the last few months. We've actually, at some points, we've seen the stock market actually rallying along with the dollar, as it seems to be a bit of a sort of confidence or no confidence in Donald Trump and the US as an economy. So obviously, if people want to buy US stocks and put their money into the US economy, they need to buy dollars. So that correlation has been a little bit off over the last few months. And we can see, obviously, the dollar has started to rally. Stock markets at new all-time highs. So stock markets aren't really reacting too much to this. And I do think it could be a fairly choppy year for the dollar. I don't see any massive moves maybe until the end of the year when, like I say, I see a bigger drawdown in the stock market and then a flight to safety, which will increase the price of the dollar and probably increase prices of bonds in the short term due to the cuts in interest rates. And that is probably then what leads into A recession, I'm not sure if we go into a recession. Some people say we're already in a recession, but that probably leads to a downturn in risk assets in the stock market, which I think will be the next big buying opportunity for us. So, like I say, I'm going to be running a fairly high cash position myself this year, just to take advantage of any volatility or any dips. But that's very much what I'm seeing on the stock market and the dollar. In terms of yields, I think at some point yields probably find some resistance. Maybe they pop above 4.2 again, but I think at some point they start to price in a more dovish Fed, as I've talked about, which leads yields to the downside, which also gives a bit of a tailwind to the stock market, and that could be our relief bounce in crypto. So anything else I want to cover in crypto? Ethereum, I mean, really just making the same moves as Bitcoin. Do we get that bounce up into sort of 3,600, 3,700 soon, or does it actually come after a more deep pullback? It really just is, similar to what Bitcoin's done on the ETH chart. I mean, it looks like from here it wants to come down and it wants to tag these lows again. I'll be completely honest with you, but obviously it's going to follow what Bitcoin does. So let's just go back to our main Bitcoin chart and we'll wrap it up there then. So it's either going to go up or down. Like I'm a little bit on the fence today. I'm really not too sure. I'm leaning bullish. I do think this pump can come over Q1. A move back to 100K is not off the cards. The question is, do we come and flush these lows one more time? I don't currently see the breakdown to 70K. I know I have talked a bit about that, but I actually see more likely that move up to 100K first before breaking down to 70K. But there's obviously plenty of shakeouts. There's plenty of choppy price action. I'm pretty heavily in cash, if I'm honest with you. I've closed the majority of my trades. I've got a couple of shorts open from sort of way up here, which I'm just running as like a longer term trade, a longer term position. That's pretty much hedging up some spot Bitcoin that I've still got. So yeah, I'm going to leave it there. Obviously, thank you very much for watching. Let's see what happens today. Hopefully we'll get a bit more information when we get a couple more days of price action, and then either we're going to lose this 100-day moving average, or sorry, I think that's the 50-day. We're either going to lose this 50-day moving average and we're going to lose this downside support here, and that will lead to at least a flush of these lows, or we're going to turn around and take out this 94,000 level convincingly, and that will lead to the breakout higher. So it's very much a case of just waiting to see what happens next. Okay, have a fantastic day, and I will speak to you all again very soon on the next one. GM.